Sehr geehrter Herr Staatsminister Boris Rhein, verehrter Professor van Dijk, Vizepräsident der Goethe-Universität, verehrter Professor Meyer, Vorsitzender der Deutschen Arbeitsgemeinschaft Vorderer Orient, lieber Kollege Rainer Forst, Sprecher des Exzellenzclusters Herausbildung normativer Ordnungen, geschätzter Professor Gilles Kepel und sehr verehrter Markus Lübbering, Ministerialdirigent in der Hessischen Staatskanzlei, meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, liebe Studierende, liebe Studentinnen und Studenten. I will give that talk in German and in English, since we have guests who don't speak German. Dear Minister of State, Boris Rhein, dear Professor Steinberg, former President of the Goethe-University, dear Professor van Dijk, Vice President of the Goethe-University, dear Professor Meyer, Chairman of the German Middle East Studies Association for Contemporary Research and Documentation, dear colleague Rainer Forst, the Speaker of the Cluster of Excellence, the Formation of Normative Orders, dear Professor Gilles Kepel, dear Markus Lübbering, Ministerialdirigent of the State Chancellery, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear students. Es ist mir eine große Ehre, den 25. Kongress der Deutschen Arbeitsgemeinschaft Vorderer Orient eröffnen zu dürfen, der im Rahmen der Konferenz Politik, Religion und Gesellschaft im Vorderen Orient stattfinden wird. Ups. Die Arbeitsgemeinschaft ist ein Zusammenschluss von Wissenschaftlern und Wissenschaftlerinnen aus unterschiedlichen Disziplinen, die sich mit gegenwartsbezogenen Forschungen zu arabischen Staaten, aber auch zu Afghanistan, Pakistan, der Türkei, Israel und islamisch geprägten Ländern der ehemaligen UdSSR befassen. Diese Region ist nicht nur aus wissenschaftlicher Perspektive hochinteressant, sondern besitzt auch eine enorme Bedeutung für Europa. Selbst diejenigen, die sich gewöhnlich nicht mit dem Orient beschäftigen, haben in den vergangenen Jahren realisiert, dass Entwicklungen, die dort stattfinden, einen unmittelbaren Einfluss auf europäische Gesellschaften haben. Politische und ökonomische Instabilitäten, vor allem aber gewalttätige Konflikte und Kriege, haben Hunderttausende Menschen aus ihren Heimatländern vertrieben und eine große Fluchtbewegung ausgelöst, die enorme Auswirkungen auf europäische Länder hatte und hier teilweise zu dramatischen Veränderungen führte. Die Deutsche Arbeitsgemeinschaft Vorderer Orient befasst sich mit diesen und anderen Themen und ist daher ein wichtiger Zusammenschluss, in dem Hintergründe aktueller Probleme diskutiert werden. It is a great honor for me to open the 25th Congress of the German Middle East Studies Association, which is held in conjunction with the conference Politics, Religion and Society in the Middle East. The association is a joint venture of scholars from various disciplines who conduct research on contemporary Arab states, as well as on Afghanistan, Pakistan, Turkey, Israel, and predominantly Islamic countries of the former USSR. The region is not only very interesting from a scholarly perspective, it is also of tremendous relevance for Europe. Over the past years, even those who usually pay no attention to the Orient have realized that developments which unfold there have a great impact on Europe. Political and economic instabilities, but most of all violent conflicts and wars, have caused hundreds of thousands of people to flee their homelands. This triggered a large movement of refugees that had a tremendous impact on European countries, where it led to changes, some of which were dramatic. The German Middle East Studies Association engages in researches on these and other issues in this vast and important forum in which the reasons behind current problems are discussed. Eine ähnliche Zielsetzung besitzt auch das Frankfurter Forschungszentrum Globaler Islam, das 2014 unter dem Dach des Exzellenzclusters Herausbildung normativer Ordnung gegründet wurde und dem ich als Direktorin vorstehe. Entscheidend für die Gründung unseres Zentrums war die Ausrufung des sogenannten Islamischen Staates durch Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in Syrien und im Irak, der in kürzester Zeit zu einem Magneten für junge Menschen in Europa wurde und eine verhängnisvolle Dynamik in Gang gesetzt hat. mit dem wir auch in Deutschland Probleme haben. Der Anschlag auf dem Berliner Weihnachtsmarkt im Jahr 2016 ist dafür ein Indikator. Unser Team, bestehend aus vorwiegend jungen Wissenschaftlerinnen und Wissenschaftlern aus unterschiedlichen Ländern, befasst sich mit diesen und anderen Dynamiken und auf einer grundsätzlichen Ebene mit Transformationen innerhalb der islamisch geprägten Welt sowie mit politischen und kulturellen Verflechtungen zwischen Orient und Okzident und versucht, Lösungen für aktuelle Probleme zu erarbeiten. Unsere beiden Organisationen haben also viel miteinander gemein. Professor Meyer, der Vorsitzende der Deutschen Arbeitsgemeinschaft Vorderorient, und ich sind uns zudem durch eine ganze Reihe von Konferenzen verbunden, die er an der Universität Mainz durchgeführt hat und an denen ich als Referentin mitgewirkt habe. Und als er mich fragte, ob ich bereit wäre, die diesjährige Konferenz auszurichten, die ja ein Jubiläum darstellt, habe ich sofort begeistert zugesagt. The Frankfurt Research Center on Global Islam, of which I am the director, has a similar objective. It was founded in 2014 under the umbrella of the Cluster of Excellence, the formation of normative orders. Decisive for its foundation was the proclamation of the so-called Islamic State of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in Syria and Iraq, which immediately became a magnet for young people in many places, including Germany. The attack committed on the Berlin Christmas fair is an indicator of this. Our team, consisting of mostly young scholars from various countries, studies not only these and other dynamics, but also on a more basic level, transformations inside the Islamic world, as well as political and cultural interrelations between the Orient and the Occident, with an aim of coming up with solutions for current problems. It is thus obvious that our two organizations have many things in common. In addition, Professor Meyer and I are joined together by a number of conferences he held at the University of Mainz, to which I contributed as a lecturer. When he asked me whether I would be willing to host this year's conference, I agreed immediately and enthusiastically. Eine Besonderheit unseres Forschungszentrums ist, dass wir nicht nur interdisziplinär und regional vergleichende Grundlagenforschungen betreiben, sondern unsere Forschungsergebnisse der Gesellschaft mit verschiedenen Transferformaten zur Verfügung stellen. Zu diesem Zweck gehen wir aus den Universitäten heraus und arbeiten mit staatlichen und zivilgesellschaftlichen Organisationen zusammen, laden aber auch Mitarbeiter und Mitarbeiterinnen dieser Organisationen sowie die interessierte Öffentlichkeit zu unseren Veranstaltungen ein. Wir haben also einen dezidierten Schwerpunkt auf die Third Mission gelegt, die an dieser Universität neben der Lehre und der Forschung besonders gefördert wird. Akademisches Wissen muss, darin sind wir uns mit der Universitätsleitung einig, der Gesellschaft zur Verfügung gestellt werden und von dieser diskutiert werden. Deshalb freue ich mich, dass unser Präsidium diese Konferenz unterstützt und Sie, Herr Vizepräsident von Dick, ein Grußwort sprechen werden. Our research center is exceptional in that we do not only conduct interdisciplinary and regionally comparative research, we also share the results of our studies with society by means of several transferred formats. For that purpose, we leave the sphere of the university and work collaboratively with organizations both of the government and the civil society. In addition, we invite people to work in these organizations as well as the interested public to our own events. We have thus put a decided emphasis on the third mission, which is, besides teaching and research, given particular support by the university. We absolutely agree with the university management that academic knowledge must be made available to society so as to be discussed by the latter. Hence, I'm glad that our presidency supports the conference and that you, Vice President van Dijk, will say a few words of welcome. Bei unseren Konferenzen haben wir bereits mehrfach mit hessischen Ministerien zusammengearbeitet und Sie, verehrter Staatsminister Rhein, hatten im Jahr 2017 bereits die Schirmherrschaft für eine sehr erfolgreiche Konferenz zum Thema Scharia und Grundgesetz übernommen. Ich freue mich jetzt ganz außerordentlich, dass Sie sich wieder bereit erklärt haben, auch für diesen Kongress die Schirmherrschaft zu übernehmen. Dafür danke ich Ihnen ganz herzlich, nicht nur als Leiterin des Frankfurter Forschungszentrums, sondern auch als Principal Investigator des Exzellenzclusters Herausbildung normativer Ordnungen, für das Sie sich stets ganz besonders eingesetzt haben. Der Cluster hat in dieser Universität eine Reihe neuer Professuren geschaffen, darunter meine eigene, und ist dafür verantwortlich, dass ich im Jahr 2008 einen Lehrstuhl für Südostasienkunde an der Universität Passau aufgab und an die Goethe-Universität wechselte. Die Zusammenarbeit in diesem Forschungsverbund hat meine Forschungen und diejenigen meiner Mitarbeiter und Mitarbeiterinnen außerordentlich beflügelt, und ich kann definitiv sagen, dass wir ohne diesen inspirierenden Verbund nicht da wären, wo wir jetzt sind. Deshalb freue ich mich auch, dass Sie, lieber Kollege Rainer Forst, als Sprecher des Exzellenzclusters diese Konferenz unterstützen. We have already cooperated several times with Hessen ministries at our conferences, and you, dear Minister of State, Boris Rhein, have acted as a patron of a very successful conference on Sharia and Constitution. I'm very happy that you agreed to be the patron of this Congress as well. I cordially thank you for this, not only in my function as a director of the Frankfurt Research Center on Global Islam, but also as a principal investigator of the Cluster of Excellence Formation of Normative Orders, of which you have already always been a staunch supporter. The cluster had led to the creation of several new professorships at this university, including my own. It is the reason why I vacated a chair for Southeast Asian Studies at the University of Passau in 2008 and transferred to the Goethe-University. Cooperation in this research association has had a tremendous stimulating effect both on my own work and on that of my staff members, and I can definitely say that we would not be where we are now without the inspiring Cluster of Excellence. This is why I'm happy that you, my dear colleague Rainer Forst, support the conference as a speaker of the Cluster of Excellence. Mein Dank gilt natürlich auch unserem Keynote-Sprecher, Professor Gilles Kepel, der bereits im Mai 2017 Gast unseres Forschungszentrums war und einen bemerkenswerten Vortrag über die französische Islam- und Integrationspolitik hielt. Professor Kepel, den ich im Anschluss an die Grußworte etwas ausführlicher vorstellen werde, war kurz darauf noch einmal an der Goethe-Universität und diskutierte hier zusammen mit dem französischen Politiker, Präsidenten Emmanuel Macron und dem deutsch-französischen Politiker Daniel Cohn-Bendit über aktuelle Herausforderungen Europas. Bei der Bewältigung dieser Herausforderungen und der Entwicklung tragfähiger Visionen können gute Beziehungen zwischen Frankreich und Deutschland eine besondere Rolle spielen. Das gilt auch für die politischen und kulturellen Beziehungen beider Länder zum Orient. Und hier schließt sich jetzt wieder der Kreis zu unserer Konferenz und zu dem 25. Kongress der Deutschen Arbeitsgemeinschaft Vorderer Orient. Of course, I also wish to give thanks to our keynote speaker, Professor Gilles Kepel, who has already been a guest of our research center in May 2017 when he gave a remarkable lecture on policies regarding Islam and integration in France. Shortly afterwards, Professor Kepel, whom I will introduce in some more detail after the welcoming speeches, was at the Goethe-University again and discussed current challenges in Europe with the French President Emmanuel Macron and the German-French politician Daniel Cohn-Bendit. Good relations between France and Germany can play an important role when it comes to dealing successfully with these problems and developing workable solutions. This also applies to the political and cultural relations of both countries with the Orient, and with this we come back full circle to our conference and to the 25th Congress of the German Middle East Studies Association. Wir haben jetzt 3 Tage lang herausragende Wissenschaftler und Wissenschaftlerinnen aus Asien, Afrika und Europa zu Gast, die ihre Forschungsergebnisse vortragen und mit anderen diskutieren werden, die daran interessiert sind, tragfähige Netzwerke zu knüpfen und mit ihren Arbeiten etwas dazu beizutragen, dass die Welt von morgen besser wird als die heutige. Es ist mir eine große Freude, Sie alle bei uns in Frankfurt begrüßen zu können. Es ist uns eine Ehre, dass Sie zu uns an die Goethe-Universität gekommen sind, und wir hoffen, dass Sie diesen Aufenthalt genießen. Für die hervorragende Organisation der Konferenz möchte ich zum Schluss meinem Team danken, das seit vielen Tagen mit den Vorbereitungen beschäftigt ist, dabei einen großen Arbeitseifer und eine bemerkenswerte Stressresistenz gezeigt hat und sich bemüht hat, für jedes nur erdenkliche Problem eine schnelle Lösung zu finden. Mein Dank gilt außerdem Anke Dietert, die als bewährte Mitarbeiterin der DAVO ihre profunden Erfahrungen eingebracht hat. Ohne sie, das wissen wir alle, wäre dieser Kongress nicht möglich. For 3 days, we have outstanding scholars from Asia, Africa and Europe as our guests who will present the results of their research and discuss them with others who are interested in establishing sustainable networks and who want their work to be a contribution to the effort of making the world of tomorrow a better place. It is a great pleasure for me to welcome all of you in Frankfurt. We are honored by you joining us at the Goethe-Universität, and we hope that you will enjoy your stay. Last but not least, I wish to thank members of my team for the excellent organization of the conference. They have been busy with preparations for many days, have shown much enthusiasm as well as remarkable resistance to stress in that process, and have taken pains to find quick solutions for any conceivable problem. I also thank Anke Dietert, the Distinguished Secretary General of the DAVO, for contributing her profound experience. We all know that this Congress would not be possible without you. Und damit übergebe ich das Wort an unseren Minister Boris Rhein.
Ja, sehr geehrter Herr Vizepräsident, verehrte Frau Professor Schröter, lieber Herr Professor Meyer, Herr Professor Forst, Herr Professor Kepel, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren. Ich will mich sehr herzlich bedanken für die Einladung zu dieser Konferenz des Forschungszentrums Globaler Islam zum Thema Politik, Religion und Gesellschaft im Vorderen Orient. Und ich will sagen, sehr verehrte Frau Professor Schröter, ich habe mich geehrt gefühlt, dass Sie mir die Schirmherrschaft angetragen, übertragen haben, und ich will Ihnen auch sagen, warum ich sie sehr gerne übernommen habe. Das Thema dieser Konferenz umfasst ja nicht nur ein weites inhaltliches, thematisches Feld, es ist Thema oder es umfasst eine Vielzahl von Staaten, und Sie haben es auch schon in Ihren begrüßenden Worten gesagt, eine Vielzahl von Staaten und ihren Zustand, der natürlich Auswirkungen auf unser Leben hier in Europa, aber natürlich auch, wir spüren es, wir wissen es, in Deutschland hat. Jeder Tag konfrontiert uns aufs Neue, dass das, was sich in Syrien oder anderswo zuträgt, Einfluss hat auf Fluchtbewegungen nach Deutschland, und dass das, was etwa in den Maghreb-Staaten passiert, natürlich auch Einfluss hat auf die Terrorgefahr hier in Deutschland. Und in der Tat, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, es stellt sich natürlich eine große Menge an Fragen, auf die die Gesellschaft Antworten braucht, aber insbesondere auch die Politik Antworten braucht, und insbesondere sie eines tut, sie sucht nach diesen Antworten. Sie hat sie ja vielfach leider noch gar nicht, die Antworten, die sie braucht, um Maßnahmen entwickeln zu können. Und mehr haben die Konflikte in anderen Regionen der Welt, zumal im Vorderen Orient, Auswirkungen auf unsere eigene Gesellschaft, Auswirkungen auf unser eigenes Leben, und mehr werden diese Konflikte zudem auch die Politik, die hier in Deutschland, in Europa gemacht wird, beeinflusst. Und wenn dann innenpolitische Probleme durch außenpolitische Dynamiken zusätzlich aufgeladen werden, dann können sich höchst explosive Situationen, höchst explosive Gemengelagen ergeben. Und meine Damen und Herren, darüber müssen wir natürlich sprechen, darüber müssen wir diskutieren, darüber müssen wir uns informieren, denn immer dann, wenn Diskursverengungen stattfinden, immer dann, wenn diese Denk- und diese Sprechtabus dann verhängt werden, dann ist es nichts anderes als ein Konjunkturprogramm. Es ist ein Konjunkturprogramm für die Populisten. Und immer dann, wenn differenzierte Betrachtungsweisen abwesend sind oder gar nicht erst gewünscht sind in der Debatte, dann gerät die pluralistische Gesellschaft. Sie gerät dann erst unter Druck, und wenig später gerät sie in Gefahr. Und deswegen ist es gut, wenn Sie hier an der Goethe-Universität mit der Tradition auf dieser Goethe-Universität in den nächsten Tagen auf der Suche sind nach Antworten, aber natürlich auch auf der Suche sind nach Möglichkeiten des Ratgebens und des Erteilens von Rat an die Gesellschaft, an die gesellschaftlichen Institutionen, natürlich auch an die Politik in diesem Land. Und wenn sie miteinander sprechen über Politik, Religion und Gesellschaft im vorderen Orient. Denn das betrifft uns hier ganz unmittelbar. Die Folgen beispielsweise, ich will das aufgreifen, des arabischen Frühlings, des sogenannten arabischen Frühlings, der zu einem weltweiten Winter geworden ist. Wir spüren sie hier in Europa weiterhin und ich will sogar so weit gehen zu sagen, sie destabilisieren politisch in vielfältiger Hinsicht auch unser politisches System in Deutschland und viele Folgen, die aus Wahlen dann hervorgehen, erleben wir ja derzeit. Und deswegen halte ich es für wichtig und ich halte es auch für richtig, dass in Deutschland verschiedene Expertisen zu islambezogenen Fragen im deutschen Kontext entwickelt werden. Das Land Hessen, teilweise mit Unterstützung auch des Bundes und die hessischen Universitäten in ihrer Gänze haben dafür gesorgt, dass es einen Raum gibt, einen Raum für Diskussion, dass es einen Raum gibt, insbesondere auch für die Forschung zu islambezogenen Themen, sei es in theologischer Hinsicht, sei es in gesellschaftlicher Hinsicht, sei es in rechtswissenschaftlicher Hinsicht oder sei es auch in islamwissenschaftlicher Hinsicht. Ich will jetzt gar nicht alle aufzählen, noch aufgrund der Zeit, sondern wenn ich das sage, dann denke ich natürlich vor allem auch an das Frankfurter Forschungszentrum Globaler Islam, das dem Exzellenzcluster die Herausbildung normativer Ordnungen angegliedert ist und das FFGI für wissenschaftliche Analysen muslimischer Dynamiken und anderer Entwicklungen, aktueller Entwicklungen in der islamischen Welt durch und arbeitet ihre Relevanz für Deutschland heraus. Und die Relevanz ist weitaus größer, als es auf den ersten Blick erscheint. Wir konnten gestern einen glücklichen Tag feiern. Wir haben gestern den Tag der deutschen Einheit gefeiert, am 3. Oktober. Und 1989, 1990 haben die Bürgerinnen und Bürger der damaligen sogenannten Deutschen Demokratischen Republik, der DDR, und zwar oft unter Hinnahme von Verhaftungen, oft auch unter Hinnahme von Repressalien und Repressionen, ihre Freiheit und damit die Demokratie im wahrsten Sinne des Wortes erkämpft, friedlich erkämpft. Und heute, 28 Jahre später, das ist ja kein langer Zeitraum, und die Bundeskanzlerin hat gestern zu Recht gesagt, natürlich ist die deutsche Einheit noch nicht vollendet, sie kann auch gar nicht vollendet sein. Also 28 Jahre später nehme ich eine Stimmung, auch angesichts von Wahlbeteiligung, der Zahlen von Wahlbeteiligung oder auch im Hinblick auf das Erstarken bestimmter Kräfte wahr, die, wenn sie nicht sogar demokratieskeptisch oder vielleicht sogar teilweise auch demokratiefeindlich sind, dieses höchste Gut, nämlich die Demokratie, als selbstverständlich hinnehmen. Meine Damen und Herren, das ist sie nicht. Sie ist es keineswegs selbstverständlich, die Demokratie. Wir müssen sie, und das ist mein Eindruck auch in dieser Zeit, aktiver denn je erkämpfen. Wir müssen aktiver für sie eintreten. Wir müssen natürlich sagen, dass es keine Selbstverständlichkeit ist, in einem demokratischen System zu leben, sondern dass das demokratische System von uns allen abhängt und von unserem Engagement abhängt. Denn die größte Gefahr für die Demokratie ist diese Art von, ja, wie soll ich es ausdrücken, diese Art von Gleichgültigkeit der Demokratie gegenüber oder auch der fahrlässige Umgang mit dem Wahlrecht beispielsweise durch etwas, was wir ja auch mehr und mehr in der Diskussion erleben, auch aufgrund der Entwicklung, über die Sie heute hier diskutieren wollen, aufgrund dieser Denkzettelwahlen. Nichts ist riskanter, nichts ist gefährlicher und nichts ist fahrlässiger, als mit diesem Recht, was andere sich erkämpfen, im Verfahren eines Denkzettels umzugehen. Das Erstarken des Populismus muss jeden von uns, jeden freiheitsliebenden Menschen Sorgen machen. Die Demokraten bedrohen unser demokratisches System mehr denn je, auch wenn der ein oder andere das Gefühl hat, es ist alles in Ordnung, es ist gar nichts in Ordnung. Deswegen sage ich, wir dürfen nicht zulassen, dass sie das zerstören, was mit der deutschen Wiedervereinigung mühevoll und unter sehr vielen Zurückstellungen erkämpft worden ist. Und deswegen braucht es solche Konferenzen. Bin ich dankbar für solche Konferenzen, die heutige in den Fragestellungen zu solchen Themen, die Fragestellungen zu solchen Themen aufgreifen und die sie dann insbesondere auch wissensbasiert, transparent und insbesondere evident hier diskutieren und austauschen, und zwar nicht im Sinne einer Parallelwissenschaft, wo Menschen kommen, die glauben, meinen, sagen, sondern wo Menschen wirklich in den Diskurs treten und untersuchen und wissenschaftlich untersuchen. Das ist das, was wir brauchen, nämlich die Methoden der Wissenschaft, um ergründen zu können, was ist und was anders werden muss und wie die Situation ist. Ich bedauere sehr, verehrter Herr Professor Kepel, dass ich Ihren spannenden Vortrag, der schon einen vielversprechenden Titel hat, From the Arab Spring to ISIS, heute Abend nicht miterleben kann, auch aufgrund der Ereignisse, die in wenigen Tagen hier in Hessen uns natürlich bewegen werden. Wünsche aber Ihnen allen heute Abend angesichts eines Programms, verehrte Frau Professor Schröter, das muss man ja sagen, was wirklich außergewöhnlich vielversprechend ist und unglaublich vielfältig ist. Also wer die Themenvielfalt sich anschaut, kann nur sagen, Respekt, was Sie und Ihr Team hier geleistet haben. Sie sprachen von der Stressresistenz und wahrscheinlich auch vielfach war notwendig eine, ich sag mal, Frustrationstoleranz in einem hohen Maße. Wer so etwas aufstellt, der muss schon einiges zusammenbringen. Das finde ich sehr, sehr, sehr großartig. Deswegen kann man wirklich sagen, das ist ein vielversprechendes Programm und insoweit wünsche ich Ihnen eine gelungene Konferenz und ich wünsche Ihnen natürlich spannende Diskussionen und gute Gespräche mit guten Ergebnissen und ich bin gespannt auf den Rat, den Sie dann insbesondere auch uns in der Politik mitgeben können. Das tun Sie sehr intensiv und dafür sind wir sehr dankbar. Das will ich an einem Ort und einem Tag wie heute sehr unterstreichen. Alles Gute für Sie und eine interessante Konferenz.
Verehrter Minister Rhein, dear Professors Schröter, Meyer and Forst, dear Monsieur Professor Kepel, dear colleagues, dear ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of President Brigitte Rolf, I'm pleased to welcome you all here tonight at Goethe-University. Hosting a scientific conference is nothing special in a university setting. However, tonight, both the format and the scale of the event are indeed extraordinary. For this productive and truly international Congress, it is an honor to have Minister Rhein as a patron, and I'm very happy that you are also here with us in person tonight. The Deutsche Arbeitsgemeinschaft Vorderer Orient hosted their most recent Congress at the University of Jena, and before this in wonderful places such as Tübingen, Bochum, Köln or Münster. Now it is Frankfurt, and we are welcoming you, all members of the DAVO. And for this I can congratulate you, Herr Professor Meyer, as chairman of the DAVO to a very special anniversary, as this is your 25th Congress of DAVO, and we are happy that you celebrate this occasion here in Frankfurt. With more than 150 presentations of young international scholars of various disciplines with a great range of topics, you are addressing the important questions relevant for the scientific exchange within the Occident, as well as for getting in touch with scholars from the Orient. To discover and to understand the mutual political and societal influences is the basis for good relationship. Particularly at times of global change, disruptions and conflicts, such discourse and academic inputs are more needed than ever. As Goethe-University, we are more than happy to providing the platform and also the space and room for your presentations and the scientific exchange. In my own research, I have focused on the relation between intergroup conflict and intergroup contact. And this relationship is very clear. The more contact we have, the more we like other group members. Or vice versa, if there are no contact opportunities, the more we see prejudice, racism, and hate crime. And we have recently witnessed this in Chemnitz, Cottbus, and elsewhere. So contact is an established means to better understanding, and we academics are, of course, no exception. We also benefit from contact with colleagues from various backgrounds, various orientations. Frankfurt as a diverse city and Goethe-University as an international place are the ideal location for such contact and discourse, and the fact that the delegates of this conference come from all over the world underline the international character of our university, the city, and this conference. Please feel all welcome at this beautiful campus, which some say is one of the most beautiful universities in Europe, and you are always welcome to also come back. I would like to say thank you to Professor Schröter and her whole team who have organized this Congress. I'm grateful for the Cluster of Excellence, Normative Orders, as cooperation partner of the conference. Thank you very much, Professor Forst, for your engagement and the contributions of the center. At the opening of the Congress, we will have a keynote by a world-renowned speaker. Professor Schröter was successful in inviting the most important French expert on Islamic studies, Professor Gilles Kepel, from the École Normale Supérieure de Paris, who has already been here twice last year at the Cluster of Excellence, and also almost exactly a year to the day with President Emmanuel Macron. It is a great honor having you again, and we are looking forward to your keynote. Let me thank you a big merci. On behalf of the whole executive board of Goethe-University, I wish you all a successful 3 days of conference, and I wish all of us tonight a successful evening and an interesting speech. Thank you.
Wo muss ich drücken? Okay, great. Dear Minister of State, Rhein, dear Vice President Van Dijk, dear Professor Kepel, dear Professor Meyer, dear Susanne Schröter, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you all on behalf of our Normative Orders Research Cluster, and a great honor, as we're thrilled that the Arbeitsgemeinschaft Vorderer Orient celebrates its 25th anniversary Congress here with us. Special thanks for that to our dear colleague Susanne Schröter and our great team. And what a pleasure to have Gilles Kepel back here with us. We owe so many essential insights into the dynamics of change within Arab societies and the complex relations between Islam and Western societies to him that we all very much look forward to your talk. Thus I will be brief. Just half an hour, relax. The work you're doing here at this conference, the discussions you will have, fit very well into the research framework of our Normative Orders Center. Since 2007, based on a generous grant within the German Excellence Initiative and with strong support of the state of Hessen, we have been working on the establishment of a center as an interdisciplinary space of research on the fundamental changes we witness in our own societies and within world society at large. We chose the term normative Ordnung, as we do not just think that we need many different disciplines to analyze current social dynamics, we do think that, but we also think that one doesn't understand the reasons for the stability or the crisis of a social, cultural, or political legal order if one doesn't understand the justifications given for these orders, and if one doesn't understand when such justifications are strong and accepted and when they begin to fade away. A social order stands and falls with the justificatory basis it rests on, and major shifts and crises are also justification crises. New narratives arise, old ones are doubted and get replaced or at least reinterpreted. These are the analyses, the kind of analysis we aim at when we say we analyze the formation and reformation of normative orders. This also opens up the space for normative questions. What is the right kind of order given a social context, given the social interests and conflicts in such a context? And we think the normative debates about the best, or at least the better, social order is part of science. It is not something extra scientific where people come up with their ideas about what a nice and better society, how it would look like. It is part of science, and I think it is important that we keep this in mind, that as much as we need empirical studies of current orders, the normative questions are also questions we have to answer in a non-arbitrary, methodologically reflected way. In past years, as Susanne already said, we were happy to be able to establish 10 new professorships in various disciplines, and they're all permanent with the help of the university and the Land Hessen, and one of them was a professorship in anthropology, researching colonial and post-colonial orders, and we are still thrilled. We were and keep being thrilled that Susanne Schröter accepted our offer and enriches our research with her great work, with her wonderful team, and the center that she founded within Normative Orders. In our new research program, starting this year, we address questions such as, and State Minister Rhein already addressed it, the future of democracy, questions of the new digital normative orders we live in, or the end of universal normative systems in law and politics. But we also address the question of social and cultural integration. And we're just these days successful, if I may add that, in becoming part of the new Federal Institute that researches sozialer Zusammenhalt. It's a difficult term to translate because cohesion doesn't quite work. Integration may be too weak. Zusammenhalt. Anyway, we're going to be busy with that. But we do know that the task of creating a society consisting of multiple cultures, religions, and faiths is the essential task we face. And all efforts in that direction will be futile if we do not understand how many forms of Islam there are worldwide and within Western societies, and which narratives of justification members of these groups develop and follow. Now more than ever, and this has been said before, and I reaffirm it, the understanding of Islam is a task of understanding our own societies. It's no longer the other. It is part of our societies. That normative orders was and will be a place for such research that reaches out into our societies, as Susanne does, is due, as I said, to the support by grants we apply for, but all of this would not be possible without the stable support by our university, thanks Professor van Dijk, and the state of Hessen. Thus, dear Minister Rhein, we're truly grateful to you for your continued and strong support for our enterprise. A support, the strength of which is most needed when the sometimes unpredictable winds of grant winning blow against you. Erst in Zeiten des Gegenwinds, wenn es mit der Einwerbung nicht immer so ganz gut klappt, erkennt man, wo man eigentlich Rückhalt hat und wo nicht ganz so viel. Dafür, lieber Herr Minister Rhein, danken wir Ihnen sehr und von ganzem Herzen. Neither we nor the great building that will host the conference, which we also could plan based on a grant by the Wissenschaftsrat, none of this would exist without the state of Hessen's help and its continuing contributions, and we will do our best, together with Goethe-Universität, to let the center flourish. You all being here is a very good sign for that, and I thank you very much, and I wish you a great conference.
Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends, it is a great pleasure for me to welcome all of you on behalf of the German Middle East Studies Association, DAVO. This is not only the 25th International Congress of DAVO, we are also celebrating the 25th anniversary of this association. So this is a chance for looking back to the start and the development of DAVO. Before this association was born, another institution existed with the name Working Group for Contemporary Research and Documentation on the Middle East. The Working Group combined several German institutions which were studying the Middle East. It was chaired by Professor Udo Steinbach, the director of the German Orient Institute in Hamburg. We have to thank him for cancelling the old working group of institutes. He initiated instead DAVO as an interdisciplinary association of scholars interested in the Middle East, in North Africa and other neighboring Muslim states, focusing also on the impact of this region on the development of other parts of the world. Within only 5 years, this is the new name, within only 5 years, DAVO became the largest Middle East Studies association in Europe. At present, DAVO has about 1,350 members. RISMUS, British Association for Middle Eastern Studies, the second largest association in Europe, has less than half of the number of DAVO members. Why is DAVO so attractive? There is, first of all, the weekly DAVO info service. The weekly DAVO info service, this is based on the information provided by a global network which comprises more than 6,000 scholars all over the world. During the last 12 months, DAVO members received more than 1,600 announcements about international conferences, jobs, grants, calls for publication, etc. Numerous DAVO members owe their jobs and important steps of their career to the information provided by the DAVO info service. The same applies to the DAVO Nachrichten, a journal which, among other relevant information, will also publish the abstracts of papers presented by DAVO members here at the conference in Frankfurt. The participation in the international congresses of DAVO is another highly attractive aspect of DAVO membership. This year we have to thank, again, Professor Susanne Schröter, the director of the Frankfurt Research Center on Global Islam, and her team for hosting the DAVO Congress. We are very grateful to all of you for your local organization of the Congress here at Frankfurt University. Thank you very much. Many thanks in particular to Mr. Oliver Bertrand, who is the main local coordinator of the Congress. Concerning the heaviest burden of the organizational tasks, this has been and is still on the shoulders of Mrs. Anke Dietert, the General Secretary of the present DAVO Congress and of many other DAVO Congresses before. Thanks to her expertise and her responsibility for the administrative tasks regarding participants and the program, the overall organization of the DAVO Congress has always been perfect. Please give her a great applause, and if you would just We have to thank also all those colleagues from different disciplines who checked the abstracts of the proposed papers. Thanks to their approval of the proposals and their rejections of some of the papers, we can expect that the quality of the presentation of this Congress will be high. This brings us to another important purpose of the DAVO Congresses, the promotion of MA students and PhD candidates by giving them the chance to present the draft of their thesis and to get feedback from advanced scholars. This is the purpose of the DAVO workshops for the promotion of young scholars, which is very helpful for the research work of our young academic DAVO members. Many thanks to Professor Nadine Scharfenort for all her work and time necessary to organize the Werkstattgespräche for the 7th time already. Last but not least, another important aspect of the DAVO congresses has to be mentioned. The DAVO Dissertation Award. Today, this morning, the prize for the best dissertation has been awarded to Silvana Becher-Celik for her study, Where to Go When You Are Old, Children of Atatürk. Images of old people in Turkey during times of changes in society, culture, politics, and law, analyzed by the example of the metropolis Istanbul. Amakanta was the main supervisor of this study. Normally, the prize is shared by several young scholars from different disciplines. However, this dissertation is such an outstanding academic study that the total prize of 3,000 euros went to Silvana Becher-Celik for her work. Congratulations not only for this award, but also because of her daughter, which was just born in Istanbul. That's the reason why she isn't here with us. Now, I wish all of you a pleasant DAVO Congress with excellent papers, stimulating discussions, and successful academic networking. Thank you very much for your attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me now introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Gilles Kepel. Professor Kepel is currently the most profound expert on Islamism, including the latter's violent version, which is called Jihadism. He's also one of the world's most recognized authorities when it comes to explaining disturbing developments and violent conflicts related to politics and religion, be they in the Arab world or in Europe. As a student, Professor Kepel enrolled in philosophy, literary and Arabic studies and gained university degrees in Damascus and Paris in 1978 and 1980. The Islamic world was undergoing radical changes at that time. In several countries, Islamist movements attempted to overthrow regimes and to establish normative orders based on the Quran and on traditions from the early days of Islam. In Iran, which was governed by the autocratic ruler Shah Reza Pahlavi, these attempts were successful. A broad coalition of leftists, Democrats, and Islamist forces started a revolution and forced the Shah to resign. Shortly after Reza Pahlavi had left the country, Ayatollah Khomeini, who had hurried over from his exile in Paris, seized power in that movement in a coup-style action and transformed it into an Islamic revolution. This did not only result in the formation of the Islamic Republic of Iran, it also nourishes the hope that Muslims can defeat any dictatorial regime if they adhere to the path prescribed by God. The slogan, Islam is the solution, triggered a worldwide revitalization of Islamism. However, another concurrent attempt to overthrow a regime by Islamist actors failed. It took place in Saudi Arabia, where a coalition consisting of Wahhabite clerics in the royal house of Saud had established a specific mixture of religious fundamentalism and monarchical rule. On 5th December 1979, a group of Islamists accusing the regime of applying double standards and straying from the right path of Islam seized the Grand Mosque of Mecca and tried to assume power by force of arms. After a few days, the uprising was crushed. December 1979 also witnessed a third disastrous event that even today continues to influence global politics, the invasion of Soviet troops in Afghanistan, and the subsequent arming of the Mujahideen by the USA. Each of these events had an international dimension, multiplied local and regional conflicts, and finally established wide parts of Asia and Africa. Professor Kepel was one of the first to engage with that complex phenomenon of rising Islamism. He did research on contemporary Islamist movements in Egypt for 3 years and obtained his doctorate with a thesis that was published as a book entitled Le Prophète et le Pharaon, en source de mouvements islamistes, the Prophet and the Pharaoh, Islamist movements in Egypt. He then continued his studies in France and conducted field work in the suburbs of the big cities, the banlieue, in which migrants from the former French colonies lead lives that are often miserable. In the 1980s, there was a first uprising of these marginalized people, and again, Islamism played an important role as an ideology of revolt. In 1987, Gilles Kepel's book, Les banlieues de l'Islam, was published, which addressed the reasons behind the unrest. Comparative studies of Christian, Jewish, and Muslim fundamentalisms resulted in another monograph entitled The Revenge of God, the resurgence of Islam, Christianity, and Judaism in the modern world. That book was translated into 19 languages. During Gilles Kepel's whole career, research trips alternated with academic sojourns at different universities, such as the New York University, Columbia University, and the New School of Social Research. In 2001, Gilles Kepel was appointed full professor of political sciences at the Sciences Po in Paris, and he has been the head of the program of excellence on the Mediterranean and the Middle East at the École Normale Supérieure in Paris since 2016. His most recent publications are on the 21st century modern jihadism and the schism caused by Islamism in European societies. Terror in France, the rise of jihad in the West was published in 2015, and The Fracture, which deals with the elections in France and the rise of the Front National, appeared in print in 2017. In that book, Kepel argued that jihadists would vote for the Front National because the latter polarizes society in a way that plays into the hands of the Islamist radicals. His most recent book, Sortir du Chaos, which will be available at bookstores in a few days, exactly on the 18th of October, if I'm not wrong, addresses the question of why the so-called Islamic State of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi could emerge in Syria and Iraq, and why that political construct was able to thrive and survive for such a long time. However, I do not want to anticipate too much, which is why I now give over to Professor Kepel. Dear Professor Kepel, thank you very much for being here today and for sharing the results of your research with us.
Guten Abend und vielen Dank. This is the end of my German. Thank you so much, Professor Schröter, for your very kind introduction. Thank you, Professor Meyer, for hosting me at DAVO, and I was extremely interested at your presentation of DAVO and its success. You did not, because you're a charitable person, mention the terrible state of the French Association. We have to learn from you. As you know, France always has to learn from Germany. And I wish that there will be in the future more cooperation between us on a European level, because this is definitely what we need. Thank you also for hosting me in Frankfurt. I'm becoming a regular, actually, because this is the third time in more than 2 years that I'm here. And I'm extremely honored to give the keynote speech at the 25th, the quarter of a century anniversary of DAVO here at the Center for Normative Orders. And actually I've questioned what happened in the Arab Springs, or what was called the Arab Spring, from, if I may say so, a normative orders point of view. How come what we thought was to take place as the coming of a sort of quote-unquote Western democratic normative order in the region, with the so-called Arab Springs, turned into something extremely different? How it ended in chaos, in civil war in Libya and in Yemen, among others, the return of authoritarianism in Egypt, and how ultimately it melted into the catastrophe of ISIS in the Levant, in Syria and Iraq particularly, and how this chaos spread everywhere. And as was mentioned earlier on by the minister and by some other speakers who preceded me, this ISIS phenomenon spread back and forth to Europe. My country was the biggest next exporter of jihadists. In Germany, people think that the French do not export much, but you see, we export jihadists, which is better than nothing. And but there are also some German exports, Swiss, Italian, Belgian. Belgian had the biggest number. We had the biggest in proportion, but they had the biggest absolute number. And the other way around, sorry. And so this is, of course, something extremely important to try to understand, not only for students of the Middle East per se, as was mentioned before, of a Middle East that would be far away, but something that compels us to think that we are part of a wider region that goes from Europe to the southern Mediterranean and the eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East, the Near and Middle East. And this is a big issue for us, because I'm not convinced that the European Union, in its institution or the normative orders it is trying to produce, I'm not sure it is very successful at it, has been able to think the kind of challenge which is taking place there. And we deal with it in terms of intelligence, in terms of Frontex, in terms of what have you, but the intellectual challenge has not been really dealt with. And I'm very glad that in the biggest European country, which is Germany, such an issue is being dealt with, and I have no doubt that with the cooperation of your neighbors on the other side of the Rhine, will slowly but surely, steadily but surely, manage to reach out into the nebulous Brussels establishment to make them understand that research and scholarship is important to think about the future. So this being said, I have to understand how this thing works, so you have to give me a hand, because I would like to show you some maps. So how do I do that? Just do this. Okay, so this is some publicity for you to buy on Amazon as of next week. I will just try to tell you in how much time do I have? 45 minutes, is that right? Okay, the next 45 minutes, so until 8:15, to share some thoughts with you about what happened in the southern Mediterranean and the eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East and North Africa in this present decade, since the beginning of this present decade, from the so-called Arab upheavals to the present. And as I mentioned before, and from a normative orders point of view, to keep in track with our host institution, how come what was praised originally as the 2.0 revolution, the Jasmine revolution and what have you, something that looked like us to some extent in the West, something that made people believe that after the demise of the Salazar, the Franco, and the Greek colonial dictatorships in Southern Europe, after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the liberation of Central and Eastern Europe from the yoke of the popular democracies, now it was the turn of the Arabs. And actually the fact that there was so much autocracy in the Middle East and North Africa meant that the only way possible out of this cycle was jihad, because there was no freedom, so it was either jihad or autocracy. And now suddenly it seemed that there was a third way. There was a democratic upheaval, and the old regimes would be sent to the dustbin, and the jihadists would be marginalized. Unfortunately, as we all know, this is not exactly what happened. And how come we made those assumptions that proved not to be exactly true? And what can we make of what happened afterwards? And if possible, I'm not sure I will have time, or otherwise I will not read the book, so I don't have to say everything. It's just a teaser. Then what can we make next? And can we get out of this chaos? How can we go beyond chaos? Now, when you look back to the Arab revolutions, or the Arab upheavals, or whatever you want to call them, one important thing is to try to understand the context. How come they took place, and how come they took place at that period in time? It's a difficult question in general. Like, why did the French Revolution take place at the end of the 18th century? Some say it's because of les Lumières, the Aufklärung, so this is my second word in German. Some say it's because there was some sort of global warming at the time already, and the price of wheat skyrocketed, and there was a shortage of wheat. People fled from the countryside to the banlieues of the days, which were called the faubourgs at the time. And that created a major social turmoil that led to the rise of revolutionary classes. And there are many explanations of the sort: Marxist, non-Marxist, culturalist, political, economic, and so on and so forth. Now, when we try to put the Arab upheavals into perspective, we have a combination of different things. One was that we dealt in a number of those countries with authoritarian regimes that were absolutely exhausted, that had benefited, for better or worse, from Osama bin Laden. And the Mubarak regime in Egypt, the Ben Ali regime in Tunisia, and even the Qaddafi regime in Libya were perceived from Europe or from Washington as bulwarks against jihadist movements and against Al-Qaeda. So they had some leeway and they were not really worried. And, you know, when a dictator is too old, he is not as astute as he was when he was young and seized power. He lets a lot of corruption surround him. He has cronies all around him, and he alienates even the segments of society that favored his or his leadership. Let me recall you an anecdote to that effect. When I was in Tunisia under the last years of Ben Ali, and a former Tunisian student who was at Sciences Po with me as a student way back, who had become a successful businessman in Tunisia, invited me for a drink at a place where we were two, because in Tunisia, when you were three at the time, one or two of the three were reporting to intelligence. So when you were two, it was better. And he said, you know, it's harsh, of course, to be extorted by a dictator. And for you to understand the rest of the anecdote, Ben Ali had married, in a second marriage, a hairdresser, Leila Ben Ali. But to be extorted by a hairdresser, this is very, very harsh. And so everything you had to do in Tunisia, if you opened a bicycle repair shop, you had to give a tithe to Leila Ben Ali's family, right? So the outreach of all the regime within the different social classes of society had become thinner and thinner, and was based more and more on repression. And in a country like Tunisia, this repression was mainly implemented by the police, because Ben Ali did not trust the army. Another anecdote, in this same stay in Tunisia, I had been invited to give a talk at the Chief of Staff school in the Tunisian army, and as I had accepted, because I was curious to know what they had in mind, and knowing that I was coming, the University of Tunis had also invited me. So at the University of Tunis, a dean, whose name I have forgotten and who does not really needs to be remembered, told me, you know, there are a number of topics that you should not deal with. You should not talk about Tunisia, you should not talk about the president unless to praise him, and so on and so forth. So everything was forbidden at the university, and the room was full of Secret Service. This may be the same tonight, but I'm not secret. And but not for the same reasons, hopefully. And whereas at the Chief of Staff school, the general who was in charge of the school told me, you know, Professor Kepel, here I want you to know that you're free to say whatever you want. Any criticism is welcome of anything. No one is going to tell us what we have to do. And this is interesting in hindsight, because, you know, when Ben Ali was starting to quiver, the police could not handle the demonstrations in January 2011, and they asked for the military to give them a hand. And the military refused. They said, no, let's put him on the plane and get rid of him. Because they were representatives of this sort of middle class to upper class that felt alienated by the regime, and they did not want him. So this was something. There was the usure of those regimes, right? That was a very important thing. 10 years after Ben Laden, you know, Gaddafi had been 40 years in power, Mubarak 30 years, Ben Ali 30-something, I don't remember, but very long time. Two, there was also a very strong economic problem. Oil prices had skyrocketed. The price of food, the price of commodities had gone up tremendously. And people who would accept an authoritarian regime because, you know, they thought that as a tit for tat for the absence of freedom and of public liberties, they could make it. They could sort of educate the kids, they could find a job or some sort of place to live. Suddenly saw that this was blocked entirely on the social and on the economic level. So the combination of the sort of aging of the dictatorships, the diminishing capacity of even of political repression, if you want, of the regime, plus this conjunction was extremely important. Also, there was the digital revolution, the fact that suddenly online was available more or less everywhere, and this is why those things were called the 2.0 revolution. So it was people gathered in Cairo, for instance, on Tahrir Square. Al Jazeera was broadcasting live 24 hours a day and 7 days a week the sitting or the happening on Tahrir Square, and so this sort of broadened the appeal. Every living room with a TV in the Arab-speaking world, down to the banlieues of Islam in France, watched that happen every day. Maybe this was something there that was not really analyzed very well at the time, because I think some of us mistook the representation of a part of the reality through the screen of the TV screen with reality. There were a lot of people on Tahrir Square in Cairo, by the hundreds of thousands, but in Egypt at the time there were 80 or 85 or whatever million people. Many of them did not demonstrate and in the streets, and many of them lived on a daily basis for their subsistence, saw that tourists stopped coming because they were frightened, and saw an enormous amount of problems in their living conditions. And this, of course, was to be felt a little later. So, something that was not taken into consideration at the time, usually from the West, and by all of us, and myself among others, was that we sort of thought of those phenomena as if suddenly the Arab world had emerged from its past and had cut with it. You know, 2010, 2011, as Professor Schröter has already alluded to earlier on, was what I had in the past analyzed as taking place in the third phase of jihadism. We had a first phase, which was jihad in Afghanistan from 1979 to 89, leading to the demise of the Soviet Union and the Red Army. That was prolonged with jihad in Algeria and Egypt and Bosnia to some extent. That failed ultimately in 1997, this sort of jihad against the nearby enemy that failed. That used facts as a means, facts, something that some of the youngest people here have never heard about. They just go to the Museum of Prehistory to see a fax machine. And it was very costly to propagate. And very, very few images. Then bin Laden and Zawahiri sort of learned their lessons from this failure, decided that there was another strategy that had to be taken, and that was to fight against the faraway enemy. And that led to the attack among many places in the West, but the most stringent, of course, New York and Washington, on the Al-Ghazwatayn and Mubarakatain, the blessed two raids of 9/11, 2001. This second period, which was a sort of top-down jihadism against the faraway enemy, top-down because they sent Saudis in the air, in planes against the towers, was also using satellite television as its key media, right? So they needed to have a sort of Hollywood-like attack so that it would capture the attention of the media that were controlled by media corporations, not by them. And those media corporations would be forced to broadcast it worldwide because of the magnitude of the attack, because of the language of fiction, the language of Hollywood, if you wish, invited itself to in the news service. This second phase failed also. Al-Qaeda did not manage to mobilize the masses. It did not manage to seize power, even though the virtue or the vice of example was very important. And from 2005 onwards, there was a third phase of jihadism, an Aufhebung, third word in German, phase of jihadism, conducted by the combination of two people with the name Abu Musab as their kunya. Abu Musab is Suri, a Syrian engineer who studied in France, who says that no elite study in France anymore. And Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, a Jordanian who had been in jihad in Afghanistan, who was based in Iraq. And they sort of combined a new strategy, considering that both the nearby enemy and the faraway enemy things were not working, and they looked for something in the middle, i.e. using the anger of young people from Muslim descent in Europe, close, part of the West, but close to the Arab countries of the southern and eastern Middle East, and lands of jihad in the region, whether it be Afghanistan, and then this is where the countries that were hit by Arab revolts come into play. And for them, the issue was to have not a top-down jihadism, but a bottom-up jihadism. And as Suri wrote in his main ideological contribution to jihadism, the issue was to have, in Arabic he said, nizam la tanzim, a system and not an organization. For those of you who are interested in philosophy, it looks like there was a philosopher who was very trendy in France by the time Suri was there, by the name of Gilles Deleuze, who developed this issue of the revolutionary rhizoma, you know, this subterranean roots that pops little trees from like reeds, for instance. And that was opposed to the Leninist model. I don't know to what extent Deleuze's views reached out into the second-class engineering college where Suri studied in France. This is yet to be discovered, but this was more or less the same. So this was what was in full bloom at the time. And when we looked at the Arab upheavals, and we just forgot about that. We thought that, you know, the strength of those democratic demonstrations, those 2.0 revolutions and what have you, that had gotten rid entirely of the past and of what had been constructed on this dialectics of jihadism, this Hegelian dialectics of jihadism, if I may say so. And so this is the clash of those two models that happened in the Arab revolts. So let me make a brief review of the six different revolutions that happened. Three of them took place west in Africa, and three of them in Asia. The three in Africa, in Tunisia, in Egypt, and in Libya, took place in countries that were largely monolithic in terms of religious and national cohesion. They were Arab with a strong Berber dimension, but it was irrelevant politically at this level, the Berber dimension. And they were overwhelmingly Sunni, with very few non-Sunnis. There were Christians in Egypt, but they had no political significance for that matter, the 8 to 10% Christian minority. So, what happened was that in Tunisia, for instance, the movement came out after Mohammed Bouazizi, or he was actually not called Mohammed, it was called Tarek Bouazizi, but nicknamed Mohammed so that he would be a representative of the masses. And in North Africa, when you want to say hello to someone you do not know, you call him Si Mohammed, Mr. Mohammed. He set himself ablaze as he had been humiliated by a policewoman, and then there are many competing stories of the original spark. And then the local leftist groups of unemployed graduates, diplômés chômeurs, as they are called in colloquial Tunisian, used this incident, or this tragic incident, to build Bouazizi as a victim of the contempt, of the hogra, of the regime, and as a symbol of the Tunisian people. And the regime thought it would be just a revolt that could be crashed down, which was not the case, because it coalesced with the economic frustration, which I mentioned earlier on, and the regime, which was politically exhausted because it had been in place too long, it was too corrupt, and it was too much out of sync with society, was unable to understand the challenge. Then the revolt spread from the hinterland in Tunisia to where is it? Here it is. So you see Sidi Bouzid, where I don't see with my glasses, and I don't see without my glasses. So it's terrible. So Sidi Bouzid is here, where it started. It spread to the outskirts of Tunis, and then in January, it made a coalition of the lower social classes, the downtrodden, the poor, and the dispossessed, with the middle classes that did not like the poor usually, but who felt so alienated by Ben Ali that they would join forces with the poor in order to oust the incumbent. For those of you who are Marxists or who were Marxists, this might remind you of something that Marx wrote about the revolutions of 1848 in Europe, where he says that in a moment of enthusiasm, the proletariat from the faubourg and the local bourgeoisie joined forces to oust the king, to oust Louis Philippe, and then to put a republican regime in function, but then this republican regime is subverted, and so on and so forth. So there was some sort of a moment of enthusiasm of this kind in Tunisia. So in this map, which is in the book, and this one is in English, yeah, which was designed by my friend, cartographer Fabrice Banan. So you see in red, this is the zone of prosperity, middle-class Tunisia, and in yellow, this is inhabited, this is desert. In yellow, you have the zone of disenfranchisement, right? And Sidi Bouzid is right in this disenfranchisement zone, but they managed to bring the forces of both regions and to apply this force in order to oust Ben Ali. So things like that more or less happened in Egypt in a slightly different way, because in Egypt the army was extremely important and hijacked the movement from the start. And in hindsight, you know, there are more and more proofs of that. And when I wrote my diary of the revolutions, Passion Arabe, and I was editing the manuscript. It was too long, so I sort of edited out an anecdote which I've put back in this book with excuses to the readers, because at the time I thought it was irrelevant, but it could be very relevant. One evening, I was invited to one of the top brass generals in Cairo with my late friend, writer Gamal al-Ritani, who knew him very well. And it was in December 2011, so Mubarak had been ousted, the revolutionaries were everywhere, the Muslim Brothers were rising. And the general told me, you know, we're going to let the brothers win, so we're going to expose their mediocrity and the people will oust them and will come back to us because we're better. So I thought the man is crazy. I mean, he's totally out of sync. He does not understand what is happening. I spend my time with revolutionaries day in, day out in Cairo all the time. And, you know, even someone like me with 30 years experience of Egypt had not understood that. The guy explained to me what was their plan, and this is something that they achieved, right? Because what was happening in Egypt very soon, and what had happened in Tunisia, but we did not like to see it because it ran counter to our preconceptions, was that below the surface of those upheavals of the 2.0 demonstrations of the Shah Yurid Iskat and Nizam, the people wants the downfall of the regime, other forces were gathering. The forces of the Islamists in their variety of versions, and they were eager to mobilize the masses. For instance, in Tahrir Square in Cairo, Mubarak was ousted on February 11, 2011. The next Friday, February 18, Sheikh Qardawi, Egyptian ulama, who's the key anchor or telecoronist, if I may say so, or predicator on Al Jazeera, and naturalized Qatari citizen, and who's the most important international figures of the Muslim Brothers, was flown back into Cairo and guided the Friday praise on Tahrir Square, which was termed the sort of joyous crowd of Tahrir Square. On Tahrir Square was turned into an open-air mosque. And so the brothers showed that they were the ones who were able to hijack, were in capacity to hijack the masses and drive their votes into their parties for the elections. So after a while, you had the two competing forces of the brothers on the one hand and the army on the other hand that would succeed each other, and that would end with the comeback of the military when they ousted Morsi, the Muslim Brother president, in a coup in early July 2013. So, but nevertheless, you had a sort of cohesive system. The country was not turned into a civil war. In Libya, the revolt started more or less on the same premises: democratic claims, repression, and then upheaval in Benghazi in the eastern part of Libya. Then Gaddafi sent a column of tanks to crush the revolt, and thanks to UN Security Council resolution, military planes from France, from Britain, and with President Obama leading from behind, destroyed the Gaddafi army and allowed for the Libyan revolutionaries to oust Gaddafi and finally to kill him. This opened a Pandora's box in Tunisia, in Libya, as you know, and the military victory did not translate into a political success. And because there again, some of the forces that were so important in the Libyan system, i.e. the coalition of tribes, which were gathered under the authoritarian rule of Gaddafi so that he could control the oil rent, this coalition was destroyed, was disrupted, and this was not foreseen by the Western interventionists, which led to the present situation. That is to say, a country which is totally fragmented. So let's see where Libya is. Here it is. So here you see the present situation in Libya with the human trafficking. Is this working? Yeah. Here, the red arrows, oil fields, controlled by the Haftar regime of this region, the present Libyan government in Tripoli, and the present and the former ISIS or Daesh outpost. So in those three areas, we had a rather cohesive, those three countries, a rather cohesive religious and national system, which led to different outcomes. What was interesting, I believe, was that we did not understand, to use your parlance, we did not understand that there were pre-existing normative orders that would benefit from the revolutionary chaos in order to reinstate or to instate a system that was extremely different from what the revolutionary movement, the moment of enthusiasm, seemed to deliver. So this was our mistake in terms of putting things in perspective. Now, let's move now to the eastern part of the region. Libya. Oh, sorry. Hold on 1 second. Okay. So, if we go east of that line, particularly in this region, in the Levant, we have a very different picture, and the same also is true in the Arabian Peninsula. This is not a fully Arab and Sunni region, apart from the fact that you have the state of Israel in the middle, which is neither Arab nor Sunni in its majority population. The Levant is divided into Sunnis and Shias, with predominantly Sunni in Syria, but with a strong minority, Alawi and others, which has ruling power, predominantly Shia in Iraq, with, at the time, a Sunni minority held by Saddam Hussein in power, predominantly Shia and non-Arab in Persia, Sunni but majority Sunni with many Alevis and Turkish, not Arab, and here in Yemen, Houthi, which is in the north, which is a sort of subsect of Shiism, and Sunni. At the time, those differences in Yemen were not relevant. People in Yemen did not really pay attention whether you were Houthi or whether you were Shafi'i. They used to pray in the same mosque, and I experienced that myself in the 1990s, attending, looking at people praying and talking to them, and they thought it was totally irrelevant. It was not like in Iraq where you had Shia or Sunni mosque, or even under Saddam Hussein, being a Sunni or being a Shia was not something that was quintessentially important. I mean, people were intermarrying, and they were building the new nationalist Arab. There were other differences, but this one was not prevalent politically. Now, when the revolt started in Bahrain, which is here, small island between Qatar and Saudi Arabia, Bahrain is largely, predominantly Shia. The dynasty is Sunni. And after 3 weeks, the Sunni armies of the Gulf Cooperation Council crossed the bridge from Saudi Arabia into Bahrain, which is officially called the King Fahd Causeway, but which is nicknamed the Johnny Walker Bridge, because this is where Saudis cross into Bahrain, where you can drink alcohol and go see some women who sell their charms. So the invasion did not plague on a Thursday night, because there's so much traffic jam on this night. It took place on a Monday, because no one visits Bahrain on Mondays, and it was put down in a matter of days. The West, which was so interested in revolutions in Tunisia, Egypt, and the like, turned its head the other way in Bahrain, because if the revolution had succeeded, everybody in the region and the West feared that because it was majority Shia, it would become an Iranian proxy. An Iranian proxy, it was an island located right in between the Saudi gas oil fields and the Qatari gas fields, was, if I may say so, not halal, and or not kosher, if you rather. Therefore, this was something, and everybody turned a blind eye on it. Yemen, as I said, started with the sort of endless revolution. I was there in January 2012. There was a tent village in Sana'a. People invited me to talk about the Egyptian revolution, the Libyan revolution, Tunisian, and the endless sort of Woodstock-like speeches in Arabic. They were all together. They had ousted the president who was nearby. There were tribes that were negotiating between themselves, and suddenly this thing became hostage of the major Sunni-Shia conflict in the region. The Houthis were backed by the Iranians. The southern Yemenites were backed by the UAE, and this became a denominational war, which, as you know, is not really near ending. Now, let's get now to the most important issue, which is the Levant. In March 2011, there again, there was a revolt in the city of Daraa, which is here in the south, which was revolt because some pupils who were between 10 to 15 had written graffitis on the wall. They were watching Al Jazeera. They heard this slogan, from Cairo to Tunis, wherever we were, Shab yurid isqat al-nizam, the people want the downfall of the regime, and they wrote that on the walls, and they also wrote, Ya Doktor alayk ad-dur, oh doctor, which is, Bashar al-Assad is often an eye surgeon, as you know, an ophthalmologist. It's your turn, and it rhymes in Arabic. So they were arrested by the secret police, they were put to jail, and they were tortured. Unfortunately, a common practice in Syria. So, before we go on, let me explain the map to you. So, what is in green, dark green, is Sunni Arab. Light green is also Sunni Arab, but desert. Pink is minorities. These are Alawis. Here also some Alawis and some Christian and Ismailis. These are the Druze, okay? And in yellow, the Sunni Kurds, right? So the revolt starts in three main areas. In Daraa, which is a place which is close to a minority, the Druze minority region, which has some privileges because of its access to the regime, but which is a place which is socially extremely deprived because they cannot immigrate to Lebanon because the Syrian army is out, because there's tremendous population growth and the land does not feed anyone. So there's an enormous resentment for economic, social, and then political reason against the regime. Then you have this huge area which will be Daesh, the Daesh stronghold, where the Euphrates water has been exhausted by the dams in Turkey, by illegal wells, and there's also a major growth of population and of poverty here. And here you have another, you have the social problem, which is doubled by a very strong resentment against the minorities here, which are accused of benefiting from undue favor from the regime. The same happens in the periphery of Damascus, which is people from rural immigrants from the Sunni Hinterland, and the same is true from eastern Aleppo. So, the first demonstrations are very unitarian in their slogans, in their appearance. This is the whole Syrian democratic society which is revolting against a dictator. But little by little, the revolt has a deep denominational cleavage in itself, used both by the regime, which tells the other Alawis and the Christians and the Druze that if the Sunni majority manages to control the revolt, they will all be killed, dispossessed, and ousted from the country. So there is no such thing as a people that can down the regime anymore, because this people is fragmented. There is no such thing as a Tahrir Square that can take place in Syria. The regime is keen not to have it. And also, the revolt is taken hostage by the region. The Gulf Arabs, the Sunni Gulf Arabs, start financing the revolt because they see in it a means to oust Bashar al-Assad, who they consider a stooge to the Iranians. Okay? For the same reason, the Iranians will start helping the regime resist, because they think that this is the way to keep a corridor from Tehran to the Mediterranean. And Iran, as you know, has its first defense line in Lebanon and in Syria against Israel, because if Natanz is bombed, then you can send missiles onto Tel Aviv. So this will be the tit for tat, and this is the first line of defense for the Islamic Republic, which is being tested now. So the revolt is soon enough taken hostage. Aleppo falls, this region falls, and in early 2015, the Syrian regime controls no more than 25% of Syrian territory. Everybody thinks they're going to go down. Now, the problem is that there again, you have another type of normative order that takes over. And this is manifested in this map, which is the map of the Daesh or the ISIS extension in 2015. So this is Syria and Iraq in their regional environment. So in Lebanon. So this is the map. This is the way Daesh sees the region, right? This is where they are on the ground, but also what they have in mind. So what you have here with the black stripes is the territory controlled by Daesh at its biggest extension in 2015. And they have, this is their line of the anti-infidel or anti-front, and this is the anti-Kurdish front, right? So, in green, seen from Daesh, these are the Sunni areas that either are under their control when they're striped, or that they have to reconquer and re-Islamize. In orange, the Kurds, who are Sunni Muslims who have to be re-Islamized because they have been diverted by nationalist ideology. In yellow, the heretics that have to be exterminated, whether they are the Shias or the Alawis or other Shias here or the Druze. In somewhere in violet, in purple here, Christians who have to be reduced in dhimmis. Here, Jerusalem that has to be reconquered, and Israel that has to be erased. With this, you have, on the one hand, funding from Arab Gulf countries that goes to Daesh, fighters who come from everywhere, and then the projection of ISIS to Europe into anti-Western attacks. In the meanwhile, you have this new if I may say so, the change of the norms, because this is the former Syrian-Iraqi border, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which is the imposition of Western and European norms on the region. On the 29th of June 2014, when Abu Muhammad al-Adnani, the spokesperson for the Islamic State, proclaimed the Islamic State, said it was not ISIS anymore, it was the Islamic State that was to spread to the world. On the same day, they broadcasted a video of a Chilean jihadist from Palestinian descent on a bulldozer, bulldozing the custom station between Syria and Iraq, saying it's the end of the I'm trying to use normative orders as much as I can in this presentation. You notice? It's the end of the European, of the Sykes-Picot normative order, and this is a new norm. This is the normative order of the Caliphate, which will extend, and this is a normative order now. So I hope you're pleased with it. And so while this was happening, and until the attacks in Europe, which compelled us to change our understanding of Syria, you know, people like some of my colleagues, whose name I should not mention for you not to boo them publicly, would explain that Syria was our Spanish war, right? Which looks like, why not? Except it doesn't have anything to do with it. And, you know, false comparison or false metaphors lead you to failed policies. Or another, same guy explained, well, no, ISIS has nothing to do with Islam. Well, of course, all Muslims are not pro-ISIS, and they are not all jihadists. But if you do not understand that ISIS makes use, maybe makes a distorted or phony use, but makes use of the Islamist vocabulary in order to create this system of norms, then you just miss everything. You just do not understand what is happening, what is at stake, right? Now, in the meanwhile, the Assad regime that knew its way in terms of manipulating the opposition with the help of its Russian advisors, just as had happened in Algeria in the 1990s, when the Russian advisors during the Algerian jihad advised the Algerian generals that it would be a good thing if the Islamist opposition was split between the so-called moderates and the extremists, and the more the extremists would be given a free way, the more slaughters they could perform, the more they would be alienated from the population, and the more the generals would ultimately win. Bashar al-Assad and his regime did largely the same. In the end of 2011, they freed from Syrian jails the worst Islamists and the worst jihadists, so that they would join the revolt. And in joining the rebellion, they of course started to fight against the other rebels, because they told them they were infidels and so on and so forth. And in the meanwhile, they were funded. And if you look, for instance, that there are interesting videos from, where is Homs? I don't see anything. Homs is here, something. Okay. There was the Battle of Homs very early on, because Homs is the intersection that there is the highway from Damascus to Aleppo, and then at Homs there is a crossroad to the coast where the Alawis are located in their majority. So seizing Homs was crucial for the opposition, because they would destroy the Syria's hub, if you want, right? So the first videos from Homs show revolutionaries or former deserters, military officers from the army who have deserted, who make proclamations. They are clean-shaven, they have a mustache, they say that they're for democracy against the dictatorial regime of Bashar al-Assad, so on and so forth, and okay, we praise them. I went to Syria at the time, across the border into Turkey illegally. I met with a number of them. They made professions of faith, of democracy, everything. Now, the more it went, the more funding from Salafi groups in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait, in Qatar, started to flood the rebellion. And you would see that in the videos, because the guys were growing beards, so that, you know, they would, the donors would be satisfied. And it was, you know, it was something that they had to demonstrate that they were grateful. And they were so extremely rich, they got all the weaponry and everything. So if you wanted to have a gun, you had to have a beard, right? And little by little, so the rebellion was taken hostage by that. So Daesh had this big thing here, and it was not until the West decided to bomb the Daesh thing that the system, if you should, the Syrian quagmire started to melt down. Now, how has it melted down? And I will end there because I have still, I've already overcome my time with the last map, which is where we are now in Syria. So, with Russian help, the regime has recovered this thing in yellow, right? In purple. Light is not habited, it's desert, and this is people, right? So this is the Alawi stronghold. Here you have the Russian-based Hmeimin, the Air Force, Tartus, Navy. Here you have Iranian bases. And here you have this sort of corridor from Tehran to the Mediterranean, which is crucial for Iranian protection of itself, but which is now under duress due to American sanctions. There, in the south, here you have the Golan Heights and the no-fly zone, or the no Iranian anything zone, where when Iranians get near, these are the Israeli planes destroying them. There you have some rebels who stayed in the desert, who are force-fed by Americans, who have built a huge military base here that try to control Iranian infiltration across the border. And here, in yellow, you have the Kurdish YPG or Rojava forces, who control most of the oil fields in Syria, with a strong American and some French presence to help them, which is something that does not allow for a full completion of the Iraqi and Syrian territory under Russian or Iranian domination. And here you have what is happening right now. Turkey has come down into here, officially originally to chase the ISIS people from here, but also because they did not want the Kurdish corridor to reach the Mediterranean. And you know, this is the zone that the Turks would ideally like to control, so that they would have no Kurdish threat on their southern border. Will they go out from this area? This is Afrin. This is not sure for the time being, and this is clearly a cut in their hand. And now there is Idlib. Idlib is the so-called de-confliction zone, where all rebels that were led down by their Saudi sponsors, by their Turkish sponsors or whatever, have been taken. This is a place which has 2 million displaced people. Among them, among the fighters, a majority of Nusra, which are jihadists. And then the issue is what is going to happen here. For the time being, the Russians and the Turks have struck a deal a couple of weeks ago, which will end on the 15th of October. No massive bombings, so because the Turks are terrified at the idea that the border might be open, then they would have to accept another 1 million refugees on top of the 3.5 they already have. plus a number of jihadists may go through and go to France and Germany, somewhere here. And so this is where we are. This is where we are now. So, if we try to look back on that, what are the lessons learned? The first lessons is that, you know, well, it's always the owl of Minerva. This was said by someone who lived nearby here. Only rises at sunset, right? Not in the morning. So it's always difficult to make a prediction and to try to understand in real time what is happening. If I am right, this analysis of this putting in perspective of the Arab upheavals from Bouazizi's setting himself on fire on December 10, 2010 in Sidi Bouzid to the fall of the caliphate a year ago, this is not something that you could foresee. Right? Even someone like myself, who had been working on Islamist jihadism and whatever, was enthusiastic at the revolution. So, you know, it took me some time to put into perspective, even though I never shared the sort of Syria is our Spanish for bullshit. But nevertheless, this is something which is difficult to do. And for us as academics, you know, we can try to use our categories to grasp those things, but there is some sort of time that we have for us to analyze, which is not exactly the time of action, right? And how to make the discrepancy between the time for action and the time for thinking is, of course, a big challenge that we are not really able to take as of now. Another thing is that nowadays, in a country like Syria, clearly Russia has managed to have an edge and to come back in the world system as a sort of great power. But is it a great power, or is it a giant with feet of clay? You know, Russia has a GDP which is below Spain and Italy, so far away from Germany, even lower than France. And so can they last? It's complicated. They managed to come back because, you know, their army is not very expensive. There is no public opinion. They had those proxies from Iran, from Afghanistan, the Fatimiyun, the Zainabiyun from Pakistan, Shias and the like, who are paid $800 a month, so which is not much. And also, they have a strange array of allies. Putin, in a way, has 4 wives, like Sultan or like a Sunni of yesteryear. One wife is Israeli, the other is Saudi, the third is Turkish, and the fourth is Iranian, in this order or another order. And they don't get along. The Iranians press the Turks so that they press the Russians so that the rebels are destroyed, are wiped away, and they want to restore an Assad regime as it was in the past, because they're interested in a strong relationship with them, because this is, you know, their hinterland, their Lebensraum. And but the Russians think that, you know, this is not going to work. You need a political solution because Syria is Sunni. It's not like Iraq, which is Shia. So if it's only a military victory, there's never going to be a political victory. The Russians will have to stay. It's going to be very costly. And they remember Afghanistan. Putin, of course, remembers Afghanistan. He was in Dresden at the time, you know, and he remembers what was the demise of the Soviet Union because of the war in Afghanistan. Doesn't want to be trapped in Syria like that. And if the Iranians behave like they behave, he fears that this is what is going to happen. Israel and Saudi Arabia have made their peace with the fact that Russia controls Syria. And I heard that from Israeli higher up Israelis and Saudis on my travels in the region over the last 6 months. I was in Saudi Arabia when the outskirts of Damascus, the Ghouta, which was under Saudi proxy control, was destroyed by the Russians, and the Saudis, who had made their peace with the Russians because they joined forces in order to push up the oil prices, said no problem. And the Israelis said the same, but no Iranians. So they push their Russian husband so that he gets rid of the Iranian partner. Turks. Well, the Russian and the Turks do not really have the same interests in the region, because the Turks still have a soft spot for the rebels, and they want to get rid of the Kurds. The obsession of Erdogan now is not to the spread of the Muslim Brothers, as it was. I mean, if possible, but it's not his priority. His priority is to get rid of the Kurds. Russia does not have a problem with the Kurds. On the contrary, I mean, many of those Kurdish movements were fed in the late USSR, they were Marxist, they have very strong intelligence networks in common, and Russia wants the Kurds to remain around because they can be used against Iran, against Turkey, as a means of pressure on Syria, and so on and so forth. So there is a bone of contention. And my gut feeling is that the Russians cannot go alone there. They cannot build the future of Syria alone. And this is where Europeans have to get into the picture, because we are part and parcel of this region. The only way to rebuild the Levant is European participation, both financial and political. For the time being, the Russians control the military situation, but they will not be able to hold there on their own. So to what extent is it possible to find some sort of a compromise or a deal with Russia in the region is the big question mark, in my opinion. To what extent, how can Europe do that? Well, the precondition would be that Europe exists, and we don't have a proof of that for the time being. But anyway, you know, this is where the analysis, putting in perspective by the academic and the political decision, can coincide. We are not quite there, but you know, I believe that this is more or less why I thought I would have to write this book, not only because it would be the end of my career, because I'm going to retire soon, but also because I think that this is an example of, to go back to the normative, this is where if we try to understand what is happening in the region as a clash of different visions, if we understand the logics, if we understand how the use of warfare changes the visions and creates a new balance between them, then I think we have a much better grasp of what is at stake than what we had when we looked naively at the Arab Springs, at the epitome of democratization in the region. With this, I think I have to stop. I do apologize for being too long, but I promised to stop already half an hour ago, but as President Chirac, that rhymes with Iraq, said once, promises are binding only for those who receive them. So thank you very much for your patience, and I don't know whether you still have time for questions, whether you're angry or hungry or both, but if there is still some time, I will be glad to take it. Thank you so much for it.